3 people die every minute from diabetes. That's the title of an article by Shazam Wong, right? Wong, right? It's a Chinese name, but diabetes isn't just a Chinese problem because 1 in 10 Americans also suffer from diabetes, which means that you probably know somebody in your family or a friend who either suffers from diabetes currently or one day will. Right? And diabetes, right, it's interesting to me as a nursing student, but also because of the nursing home where I'm working, I have several residents that suffer from diabetes. And in fact, the treatment nurse there, she gave me guidance on how to prepare my points for this talk so that everything, would be just right. So diabetes isn't just about having elevated blood sugar. Diabetes is a silent killer, right? And it kills us by affecting all of the other organ systems in our body. And right now, we'll just consider briefly how it affects our cardiovascular system, our kidneys, and our nervous system. So the first system that diabetes seriously affects, and then in turn affects everything else, is our cardiovascular system. Right? And it does so because with the elevated glycogen or blood sugar, right, in our blood, it hardens the walls of all of our blood vessels. And when our major blood vessels are affected, that's macrovascular disease and can lead to heart attack or to stroke. When the minor blood vessels are affected, that's microvascular disease, and it'll affect all of our other systems and organs, as already mentioned. And in a particular way, it affects our kidneys and it affects our nervous system. So then the next thing we'll see how diabetes affects us is the effect on the kidneys. And in fact, Muhammad Adam and his colleagues, they considered just that in their article, The Effects of Diabetes on the Cardiovascular System. And they explain, right, why the kidneys are particularly susceptible. And they are because the kidneys are made up of millions of tiny little cells called nephrons and all sorts of little blood vessels. And so as the blood flow through those vessels is restricted, then the nephrons are affected, they become less efficient, and then they begin to die. And as they die, they don't filter our blood the same way, so they don't filter out the excess fluid, and so we'll get elevated blood pressure. And they also don't filter the toxins out of our system. And so we'll begin to have those side effects until eventually we may even experience total kidney failure. And once we experience total kidney failure, then we only have about a week to live unless we're put on a continual dialysis machine. Finally, we'll consider how diabetes, right, how it affects our nervous system. And once again, the effect, or the damage comes from microvascular disease. And this is exactly what Danielle Dressen explains in her article, The Effects of Diabetes on the Body and Organs, right? Because once again, as those small little blood vessels are affected, then the nerves begin to die, right? This is called diabetic neuropathy. And peripheral neuropathy is especially grave to the diabetic patient. Peripheral, meaning the hands and the feet, the fingers and the toes. And neuropathy, because first they experience pain, then numbness, and then a total loss of feeling. And with that total loss of feeling, right, they don't notice, they aren't aware of the wounds that they have, especially on their feet. And then so those wounds, they won't be taken care of. They won't heal properly because the blood flow is restricted and the blood has more toxins in it. And those wounds can become larger both in area and in depth. And as they become larger in area and depth, it's at risk of tissue necrosis or gangrene, but it's also at risk of infection, right? Because you have that larger area also being fed by more glycogen, so the microorganisms will flourish, and the diabetic patient is at risk of sepsis, right? Having an infection throughout their whole body. And while that's not a guaranteed death ticket, it is very highly susceptible to mortality. And so I just want to show you quickly, some images of what that might mean, right? So we have here a large wound. As you can see, it would be very open, right, to sepsis. And then here, two different images of gangrene, a small area, right? And then here, a very large area on the end of the toes, right? And as you can see, once the tissue is all black like that, there isn't any hope and it'll have to be amputated, right? So there are all different stages that we need to be aware of. And so in conclusion, right, diabetes, right, is much more than just elevated blood sugar, right? It really is a silent killer. The diabetic patient is at 2 to 3 times a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, right? They also have to have a much higher risk of kidney failure, right? And they have to be very aware of any lesions or any wounds on their body. And so I hope now you're all aware of the seriousness of diabetes that it can be for us, for our loved ones, and for our country, and know that diabetes is a silent killer.